Welcome to the Fatigue Files, a podcast that explores fatigue conditions from as many angles as possible while pushing the boundaries of thinking about fatigue as a signal to the 21st century and beyond. Cutting-edge thinking, practical strategies, thought-provoking explorations. They're going to all be here, and I'm your host, Anna Greer, welcoming you to this edition of the Fatigue Files. So welcome everybody to this edition of the Fatigue Files, and I'm delighted to have with me the delightful Anna Rahe, who I've just met, and I think, God, soul sisters. Anna, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and what you do, because I don't think I'll do you justice.
Okay. Hi. Thanks for having me on here. It's really fun. I do agree with our little soul sister connection. I am a humble pedestrian human who has been on a journey for 25 years to heal myself. I bumped into this amazing human anatomical system that was relatively unknown called fascia, or the connective tissue system. And 25 years ago, it was pretty fringy, and now it's starting to come really into focus in science and also what we were talking about kind of in spirituality, the connection. And so as I was healing myself, I'm kind of a natural educator and teacher. And so I developed an entire body of work that is dedicated to working with this medium, this body system. It has special kind of requirements and what it does for your health and your entire being, really, from body all the way up into your soul, the soul work of it. And so I don't know if that's what I do. I just want to help people. There's a process of healing, of advancement, of growth that really I'm passionate about, and helping humans on their journey, wherever that will lead.
I love it. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. One is, Anna, a little short potted version of your journey. What happened to you and how you discovered fascia and what it came to mean to you?
Perfect. So I think that the very shortest version is that I obviously had some trauma in my background. I was sexually abused as a child, and it was pretty severe, like ritualistic. And that, in combination with my genetic makeup, it created a very hostile inner environment for me trying to grow a brain, neurologically understand myself, giving me sense of autonomy and purpose. And so I ended up having a pretty severe eating disorder in my early teens, led me into severe depression later on through my later teens. And it was at about 21, I was living in San Francisco, and I had done this very deep dive. I'd always been in therapy. My parents were really progressive and wanted to get me help. But I did this summer of healing where I lived in a mountain cabin in the middle of the Rocky Mountains, all alone for 3 months. It was the most terrifying and rewarding experience ever. And so I'd done all this deep psychological work. And about 3 months after that, I started having severe body symptoms of things I couldn't explain. And some of them I kind of wrote off as related to my eating disorder, like they were digestive and stuff. Other ones were like musculoskeletal, and others were even more kind of complicated, like neurological and respiratory. I had a lot of respiratory problems. And I would go to Western doctors and try to, start figuring out what was going on. I had become a Pilates certified instructor when I was 18. So I was and a dancer. I was a professional dancer. So I would say I had a pretty decent knowledge of body, at that point. But I did also start noticing the symptoms I had were really diverse and really kind of sporadic, and they didn't seem related. So you'd kind of in Western world, you go to different specialists all over the place. But I noticed that all of my symptoms would work together in this really kind of fluid way, that I'd have a trigger or, something. And so I knew early on in my journey that it was related to fascia, because I had taken a somatic class as part of my Pilates training. And I'm like, this doesn't feel muscular. This doesn't feel could this be fascia? And so I just took a deep dive. And what I was learning was that the things that actually helped ease my chronic body problems were very opposite to everything that I've been taught, both in my highly professional Pilates programs, in my yoga training, in my movement disciplines, in my medical, interventions with therapies. And so I started really looking at it. I'm like, why are we teaching these things? And these flare up my body, but then I'm finding reprieve when I do the opposite of what I've been taught. And so there was this mind thing of like, I went through like rage where I was so angry at everybody because I was getting wrong information. And then I went through acceptance and then like all these stages of grief. And I'm like, okay, so now here's here's what I'm going to do to heal myself. And I was running a Pilates studio at the time, and I started teaching these things to my Pilates clients, and significant changes, like radical changes were happening in their bodies. And so I kind of became known for complicated body problems and being able to help with those. And I've just kind of developed it from there. So that's my journey of healing and remodeling and working with fascia. It's very different.
Brilliant, Anna. So just for those who don't know, what is fascia?
So fascia, the word fascia, is kind of like describing a generic body tissue. It's kind of like saying my shirt is cotton. It is a fabric. It is a material inside your body. If you were to, kind of a gross analogy, but like cut yourself open and excavate all of your large massed organs, you'd be left with this like kind of gel-like spider web stuff inside of you. And it looks literally like a kitty went crazy with yarn all over you. It's very disorganized. It looks really sporadic, but it's everywhere. And the science community for years, medical community, just disregarded it. They would like kind of pull it apart for the more interesting massed organs of like the heart. And they're like, this is connective tissue. And they knew it was connective tissue, but they didn't know its significance. But so fascia is a substance that has got collagen, elastin, reticulin, different types of proteins. And it holds the body, gives it shape, helps to individuate body systems, connects systems together. But what's really fascinating, what makes me passionate about fascia is actually when it's viewed through the lens of an entire body system that comes with its own organs. And these are not organs the way that we think of massed organs like the heart and the lungs, but they're layered organs. They're deeply wrapped in and around and through, and fascia organizes itself around every other body system. And so in that way, it starts to become this master system that is operating many physiological things. It's like a sonic system. It's a irrigation system. It's a moving system. It's a really deeply tied into the ANS, which we'll probably end up, digging into with your podcast. But so when you look at fascia from the whole body experience, its capital, service of the body is your energy grid. It's your smart grid. And just like on the planet that regulates high voltage, influence to low voltage electronic influence, you have those things on all levels of your experience. The deep low voltage is like cells that are proliferating and tissue that is building. Your heart sends off an EKG or the gram is not, but the electromagnetic pull of your heart. And so fascia is working behind the scenes, modulating these energies and our chemical responses to things that contract the tissue, and it's trying to distribute and create this health. But fascia is very sensitive also as the fiber optic kind of quality of how to move energy. Like, how do you keep energy moving and not contracturing in the body and restricting that? And so that's where it kind of comes into more of that also soulful growth. It leads into different areas of the brain, and we'll go into that later, but that's kind of what fascia is as a substance. But then when you look at it through the whole system, it's regulating how nutrition gets from your digestion into your cells. It regulates how the water content of your body is being distributed and how the different kind of like microbiomes inside the body are regulating their substances. So it has really significant relationship to who you are as a person, not just as a body, but all the way up into your mind and your soul.
So it sounds like a kind of highly intelligent, distributive, lively organ that goes through the whole of the body as a communicative, but also a kind of impulsing kind of quality to it.
100% has what's called the fascia flux, and it's this almost like this low grade frequency that pushes energy and helps to distribute it so it doesn't sink into different areas. And it's like this life force that's moving through you and moving things through you.
Right, which is presumably why it's so critical the fascia itself stays fully mobile, because I'm assuming if it doesn't, you get calcification isn't quite the right word, but you know what I'm saying.
It's called fibrosis or ossifications. You can get adhesions, which is just actual damage versus inappropriate use and hydration qualities. Fascia's optimum state is extremely hydrated, very lubricated. It's like a shock system, so it helps to keep from, gravity and the influences of gravity and load on you. But if your fascia is dry, kind of like ramen noodles, okay, it cracks and it breaks and it can't actually be a conduit. It's a substance that is an actual conduit of energy motion. So if it's compromised, it shuts down your energy and blocks it. And that can have very extensive, like that's why I had IBS symptoms that matched my respiratory systems, where I felt like I couldn't breathe. And it's very volatile too. So like in my symptoms, for example, I would go out running 5 miles into Golden Gate Park one day and feel like I was a marathon runner. And 2 days later, I would go try to do the same run and feel like a 10-pack-a-day smoker. And all of this is how fascia is regulating and extending and contracting and pushing and pulling energy through the body, and it vices different organs and compromises their function.
And it sounds then as if movement itself becomes a hydrating technology through the fascia. So micro movement presumably as well is effective at moving things through the fascia.
Yes, all kinds of motion is lotion for the body. It's essential. And what fascia taught me was that movement, in the perspective of what fascia needs, is actually a metabolic process. And a metabolic process, every metabolic process in our lives, whether it's emotional or physiological, starts with 3 steps. You generate tension or you generate food into your body, then you animate or metabolize it down, and then you eliminate it. And so motion is this process of taking static restriction, static weight, load out of your system and putting it into motion. And that's kind of a different way than what we usually relate to our fitness. We think of exercise and fitness as our only kind of in for motion, and it has to be done really hard and pretty aggressive, and we focus on tightening and toning and strength and stability over agility and mobility. And so all of a sudden, so fascia is 70% water and 30% fiber. And so you look at your body and you're actually more of a fluid than you are a solid. And we apply the wrong science to our motion. And yes, motion is happening in the micro movements of our lungs and our tissues, and then it works out into, and that's the metabolism of moving that movement out. And I think that what we kind of miss is that we do movement in a fitness exercise way that restricts physiological movement. Those end up being at odds, right? It's the same thing that happens when we hit fight or flight. Our entire physiology shuts down, our digestive shuts down, like the neurochemicals produce this cocktail of experience that resembles trauma. And then our body and our tissues tighten up. And unless we counteract that and actually fully metabolize that experience out of our bodies, it lays in our tissues as this toxicity, a septic toxicity. And so we want to be able to have synchronicity from inside the movement to outside. And the best way for maybe the listener to think about this is that if you're a fluid body rather than a solid body, our physics changes from solid mechanics, levers and pulleys, industrialized, movement, to fluid dynamics, like the wave on a shoreline, or a way to think about this is like the rock in a pond. And so when you're doing physiological movements, it's like this internal micro movement that fascia is regulating and has to have give into the next eccentric circle and then the next eccentric circle. And so we're looking for that energy is moving out in this frequency of motion from inside of us out into our lives.
So this sounds almost tidal.
It's a great word.
Tidal quality to this. And I love the resonance of the idea of staying fluid and flowing, because that's so resonant with what we need to do psychologically, what we need to do to state shift, what we need to do to hold space for our discomfort. We have to be the flowing sense of ease around the discomfort, to allow the energies of painful emotions or repressed experiences to move through the somatic field, to come up through the body and be released. I mean, it's fantastic. The sort of resonance is there between all those things. So this is really exciting, especially for people with debilitating fatigue, because often people with debilitating fatigue can't exercise without something called post-exertional malaise. And as you say, sometimes our ideas of exercise are mechanistic. I mean, I'm actually into muscle-centric medicine. That doesn't mean it's mechanistic, but I think the muscle as an organ of longevity and as part of the endocrine system is hugely important. So there is something there. But when you're at a certain stage of illness, the most you can kind of do is start with little movements. But what you're saying is these little movements are actually transformative, powerful ways of recovering the ability to metabolize experience and also to bring energy through the system in very, very clear ways, including with hydration. This very material, what you're saying. And I'd love you to sort of just speak to those who are maybe bedbound or couch-bound about where they could start with micro movements. What kind of things could they be doing and thinking about that would actually energize their body in a very gentle way that doesn't push the boundaries of their capacity?
I love that you're asking this, because so often fascia gives us this road in. So muscles are more kind of programmed and wired to our adrenal response. They are supposed to be used selectively, and they usually activate us to get us away from danger, right? And we don't want to live in chronic activation of that sympathetic nervous system. And that is more what happens when we overuse the muscles without regulating the energy release into the fascia. And these are two complementary. If you look at how fascia, and we're not going to have, I'm saying that we're not going to have video on the podcast, but for the reader or listener, there's something I want you to think about, because you're going to be, depending on if you're able to get up or not, it doesn't matter, because we're talking about continuum, being able to do inside micro movements, what will build to the next continuum of these other potentials. This is actually the journey of healing, is you start with small changes and then you can put them into big changes. And fascia and muscles are very complementary systems, but they're opposite. So muscles generate a really strong contractile nature, and that energy that is generated from the muscle is then distributed by the fascia. So what strengthens the muscle is a pulling in, is what actually passes to fascia is spreading out. And this is a push-pull relationship that starts to move energy through you. And so it's the title. I love that word. And actually, when we start looking at core movements in anatomical physiology, I use the word tidal wave all the time to initiate what the spine is trying to do to move these energies through. So if you can picture fascia's organization is more like tubes. Our bodies are more like tubes than sticks, okay? So I picture this like a Chinese finger toy. It's a woven toy that you put one finger in one end and you put the finger in the other, and then you pull. And then you push. And when you pull, the fibers tighten and it gets strong. And when you push the fingers together, the fibers loosen and you can take your fingers out. These little tubular experiences, as I'm describing it, is how the fascia organizes around muscles. So you have a muscle fiber and there's a tube of fascia on it in a micro way. And then you have another fiber and another fascia tube. And then you have another fiber and another fascia tube. Pretty soon you take all of those fibers of muscles that are all circled in fascia tubes, and you bring them together to create a muscle bundle. And then fascia wraps around the bundle of the muscle. And then fascia wraps again into a tube around the bone. And so what they're starting to see is that movement is not created by a contracting of a muscle, but actually the way that the fascia is being pulled down into the bone and animating. So fascia creates the animation that will start to restore health, energy, and restore our fatigue, because its whole goal is to share load rather than contract and isolate. Instead of trying to isolate, I mean, this carries all into our mental health. Instead of isolating, when you have chronic illness and chronic fatigue, it can be extremely isolating. And fascia is constantly teaching me like more psychological and spiritual lessons of like how you connect, how you share your load, so if you are bedridden, you want to know that mechanism, because you can move fascia independently of muscle. Okay. And it feels light and it feels subtle, but it's really, really powerful. It's called, so muscles flex and fascia fluxes. And what I would do to start trying this is I would turn on my muscle. My muscles were so kind of hypertonic from genetics, from, high collagen input, but from trauma, right? Emotions that were not released from my system. Those burdens are very real and actual, and they fatigue the system deeply. And I would try to start being like, I can't move my muscle. I can't stretch this way. I feel restricted. I felt like I was wearing a tight, straight jacket. And on the inside, I had a lot of different like pokey and sharp objects. And so I would lay there and I'd be, what if I moved nothing except this muscle? Except this fascia. I was looking for the fascia flux. And one of the best ways to do this is to lie on some type of a massage tool. It can be a tennis ball. It could be, we have this wood roller that I first found in a store in San Francisco and was the, impetus to finding this moment I want your readers to know about. And what you do, which is interesting in fascia, or especially in GST, which is what I teach, is that instead of avoiding pain, instead of avoiding the fatigue, instead of avoiding, you go in and you microdose that tension into the system. It's almost a homeopathic approach. And you say, I have to show my body, I have to show my brain that this toxicity, this nociception that's telling me that I have too much of something, too much stuck energy, too much pain, I need to show that it's just enough that I can move my fascia and the fascia will start to dilute it. It'll start to spread the fibers, start to take that toxic tension out of the system and share it. And what I was noticing in the very first stages of my own healing was I would get such sharp pain. I would lay there and then I'd feel my fascia stretch and spread. And immediately the pain would lighten. And what that does to the brain is it says, oh, there's space and there's moon. This is non-threatening. And it's a calming sensation. It's an endorphin release because fascia is connected to the endorphin system, the way that muscles are connected to the adrenal system. And so if you can find this spread as you're lying on a foam roller, or if you are like, I have a collection on our online studio that's for chronic fatigue. And it's all done lying on the floor because you take out any type of effort and you can put the focus into these moments of movement that you're trying to restore. And so you go in and you feel your pain, you feel the spread, and then you ask your brain, what would it feel like to make that happen? That spread of fascia on its own. Can I control it? And the answer is yes. And so I would take each moment and I would make it happen again and make it happen again. And with each moment, there was more freedom and more liberty that would come in. And pretty soon I saw the bigger picture of how to move my fascia in ways that would actually liberate me on larger scales, but I could start small that felt manageable.
When you say you were using your brain, does that mean you were using the imaginal to move the fascia without the physical block that you were using or the thing that you were lying on? So you taught the body, did you teach the body the sensation of lying and releasing and then replicate it in the imaginal so that then the body just responded?
Such a really good question. And I think that's always been in my brain, trying to understand that element, because I feel like the way we are as humans, we have to first imagine before things are possible, right? My daughter, just a really quick side note, came to me the other day. She was so frustrated because she wants to do her back walkovers. And she's like, but I can see it. I can see it in my brain. But why can't I do it? If I can see it and feel it, like what it would be like, why can't I do it? And I said to her, that's such a good question. What's my answer as a mom? Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So I said, I think that it's innately in us in the divine as a pull, as a magnetism towards our potential, towards what we are looking for of wholeness, completeness of this journey that's going to take us there. And so everything starts with the idea. So when I was lying on that roller, yeah, it was this ideal. I had to say, what would happen if I could do this on my own? What if it isn't the roller? What if it's not the roller doing it to me because I'm a passive recipient? And I would spend 3 hours on the roller and I would do it and I'd get reprieve, but I'd go and do my dance, class, or I'd have a rehearsal and all of my symptoms would flare back up and I'd be down for days. And so I had to be like, is it possible that it's not just the roller pushing into me, but it's something that's happening? So I would observe. And one of the biggest things is like, you have this ideal of what I want, or the imaginary, right? I'm imagining that this is possible. But there's a very powerful neurological, I don't want to say break, but like a definition or definitive state between what is like imaginary and what is actual. And so what I started physically realizing is I could contract my fascia very physically. I could control it by my mind, but it wasn't imaginary. It wasn't a state of not being. And then I let my body just physiologically do it. I could command it. And that is where I think it's the most potent as a medium for healing, change, and for purposeful transformation, is that we don't want to be passive recipients in our lives, right? That tends to lead to like victimization thinking, that things happen to us. And when you show the brain, especially with fascia and how it feeds into the insula, which is where our interception is being fed to our sense of self, our identification with things, not just information, but we personalize our experiences in the insula of our brain. Fascia feeds there. That's where our reflex is. When you make that distinction, all of a sudden, you're not in the imaginary. And there is something potent about being able to know that this is actual and I'm doing something very physical and intentional to bring about this change. And that feels empowering rather than, yeah, if I lie here for hours, I'll get released. But that didn't change when I got up and I had to go and live my life. Like that's probably a huge break I imagine, that you deal with people in states of extreme fatigue, is that they'll have good days where it feels fine, but if they go up and try to do anything, they can't. And so we're trying to get from one place to the other. And I think that actualization rather than only imagining, and I don't know how that word is working for you when you asked me that, but I do think that there is a difference, that I had to make that distinction. And I don't know what it is. I don't know the neurological reason behind it.
Okay, so I'm a hypnotist.
Yes.
And so if you ask me if something's real or imaginary, I'm just going to say yes. Also, 98% of what we do is unconscious, and the unconscious is the body. The visual cortex has privileged access to the whole system. And I see a difference in a way between imaginary and the imaginal. So I can think of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and I can imagine that as a cartoon. That's clearly just an act of imagination, right? To me, the imaginal is the potential, the embodied potential that happens when we activate certain brain networks to construct a different kind of reality expectation, a reality tunnel. And we set the reticular activating system, looking for what's important to us. Plus, the brain and body are still part of the body. Like the brain isn't separate from the body, it's a subset within the whole body, right? So I think of mind as distributed in the body.
Love it.
So yeah, so for me it's distributed, and brain and body are co-emergent parts of an emergent, complex, lively system. So when I mean, we can see it really clearly on like films when we we know that a film is fake, right? We know that when we're watching a horror movie that it's not really happening, but our body responds as if it is.
That's right.
Because there's a highway that takes you straight from your imaginal into the body system. So if I think, if I have a really scary thought or image, my body responds immediately.
Yes.
I've got a whole neuropharmacology in my system. I can choose to be high on endorphins and serotonin and oxytocin, or I can choose to be living off cortisol. And the choice, the agency comes in with where I direct my awareness, attention, and focus, and how I choose to see. And it becomes more problematic, of course, when we're looking through a feeling or through a state, because we don't see that that's just a tunnel we're looking through.
I love how.
So if I'm scared and I think the world is a scary place, I think the problem's out there, that the world is very scary, because I'm looking through my fear. But if someone can help me see that the fear is a state that I'm in, and that there are other options, there are things that I'm not considering that would enable me to reevaluate what's out there, that's enormous agency. And what I'm hearing you say is that you exercised a kind of imaginal agency when you recruited your sense of the imaginal, which was on, is you directing the unconscious, which is the body, right? So you got physiological responses because it's all one system.
I think I love your language for that. And I think that's exactly right. So the way that the language I would use is that the brain is the organ of mind consciousness, the way that the fascia is the organ of body consciousness. And it's one system that is sharing information. And I love this idea of, so I recently, like in the last 2 years, I had done therapy my whole life intellectually. Great analysis. I'm like a killer of analytical thought. I'm like, yes, slam that. But I still wasn't getting better. I wasn't getting whole. There was still stuff that just felt like I couldn't, and I felt like I was missing information. And so I went to hypnotherapy. And I found the right hypnotherapist. I'd done it a couple different times. And I'm like, there's something. And I think that what I hear you saying in my language is that really mind can, gives you this certain type of information. And I would say it in this way, that body gives you this kind of information, and hypnosis is actually tapping into the untapped information that we don't usually get about ourselves. I think about them like two rivers. Like we have digital and then we have analog, and we have data and we have intellect and we have intuition and we have technicolor. And so when you work in the imaginal, you're actually opening up that communication for different information to come in, that you're not just relying on what your brain can only conceive, but what the body is actually able to share and inform, and that exchange is usually where the breakdown happens in becoming whole, where we either live completely above the line in our brains, or most people in this day and age don't really live overly embodied. Let's be honest. It would be nice if they spent a little more time deeply embodied. But I think that, maybe that's where the connection of where fascia comes into what you're talking about, is that I used something other to collect this information that was aimed at actualizing, right? I don't know that, I think in my head, I like the word imaginal. I'm still going to think about this after this podcast and see how because I don't, in Pilates and stuff, they're like, imagine that you're fixed posture. Imagine you're a marionette doll and pull the string from the top of your head, or imagine you're a willow. And I'm like, that never worked for me because it's imaginary. The brain knows that you're not a willow or knows that you're not a marionette doll. So it's like the power for me in fascia was that I had this actionable thing that was like, if you move like this is the outcome. And it felt concrete, even though it was really hard to describe. It was effervescence, almost like in that imaginal zone where I'm like,
But it's bodily knowing, though, isn't it? Like the
bodily knowing.
the pulling up, except I studied physical theatre years ago. I was a mime.
Oh, you were?
I was a mime when I was around 20s, I think. I was doing physical theatre. I've always been really into my body and,
Body, yeah, absolutely.
martial arts and all that stuff. But the, pull up, imagine a string pulling you up. You just get a postural change, but you don't get a state shift.
That's right.
Yeah, it's the state shift, isn't it? You want the state shift, plus you want the interoceptive openness to what the body's communicating, because most of what we are, 98% of what we are, is implicit. We're running all these implicit programs all the time. And there's something about tuning in and being able to sense some of that, to make it more conscious, to make it more explicit, to make it more relational, so that there's a connectivity that comes, which mirrors what you're saying about fascia. There's an inner connectivity that evolves in us as we attune to our embodied, lively beingness.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I talk about with clients and people on my program quite a lot, is learning to trust the body. Symptoms are communication. They're very loving. They're loving communication from a system that is trying to find its way back to homeostasis and might be being prevented by, environmental toxins or inner toxic states, or, as you say, modes of stuckness in the physiology. And the more that we can sense these things, plus with the education and the science to show us what's there so that we can map it better, the more chance we have to come into alignment and partnership with this incredible intelligence, this multiple intelligence that we actually are.
That's right. I love that. I love that so much. Will you do me a favor and elaborate? I love your language so much. Elaborate on implicit in us. Like, where do you see in your line of thought the programs we run? Are they all learned? Are they behavioral? Are they, when you say things are, 90% of us are running off implicit information, talk to me about that. It's such an interesting.
What I mean by that is, there's so many layers to it, but like, for example, some of our implicit programming is societally given to us. Like, we grow up in particular cultures. In some cultures, pain means a different thing. Pain emerges in a pre-constructed net of social meaning. So we've got that for starters, the social construction of meaning. It almost comes into the tissue, doesn't it? Like, that's just reality. That's what we think of as reality. That's what we accept. That's what we know. And if we try to step outside of it, our physiology might feel uncomfortable until we know that actually we can step outside it safely, right? Which is where the ANS activation and all that sort of stuff comes in. But like, I learned to ride a bike when I was a child, and my dad kind of helped me and said, right, you've got to go faster, Anna. And, if you've got motion, then you can turn safely and all that. Now I could get on a bicycle and go to the shops thinking about what I watched on TV last night. I've got an implicit program. And we've got literally probably millions of these implicit programs running for how do I respond when my partner frowns in the way my mother used to. This is where we often get into trouble, right? And this, if you've gone through psychoanalysis, you understand all of this.
The imprint, yeah, the neurological.
Yeah, that's what I mean when I'm talking about, we're 98% implicit, because we're not even conscious of what we're running half the time. And that's where working with a skillful change worker such as yourself, mm-hmm. or such as me, to actually start to become more conscious of those implicit things, so that the range of choice, the sense of agency in relation to the self,
yes.
at all levels,
yeah.
expands, flexes, and flows, which brings us back to this whole glorious thing of the importance of fluidity, right?
Yes. Being able to create options. I talk about that. I love your word agency too. I talk a lot about, like, because I work first in the flesh, like my medium is, flesh. And then I love how it translates out into bodies. This idea, and I think this is what you're talking about, of like this lake of pain. So people come to us with a lake of fatigue, a lake of pain, a lake of trauma. And they want us to hop them over this lake, like get them from this side and cross over and have freedom on the other side. But when they come to us, there's so few lily pads. There's so few options. They're so conditioned to this running this code, this programming. They're so unconscious of the implicit motivations that I tell people often, like, it's not so much about doing things perfect. It's exploring all of the options. Like, what if we could expand this thought or, take this information and make this action differently? And all I ask them to do is like, get some lily pads on your pond. Get some options, because then I can help you cross over. I can jump you here, and then we develop another one, and I jump you here. And being able to, I think that's the idea of jumping from, if I'm understanding what you're saying, the jumping from lily pad to lily pad is like the agency, having choices, having options, but it's all predicated on being able to have a deeper sense of insight, of being able to see and not tune out or turn off, or I think collecting information. I love that you said this, because it's something that I talk a lot about in terms of relating to pain, right? Pain is a generic thing. It's just information. And you said that really nicely, that it's like, it's just communication. If you take it and it's transactional, if we can offload all of our preconceived narratives that we put on and the loads that we assign to things, the meanings we assign. And we're like, what if this is just a transactional information where my body fatigue is telling me something rather than it has to have this meaning or it came from this, and that's what I loved about hypnotherapy, quite frankly, is that I didn't have to have the reason behind it. I could just have the information without tying it to some concrete thing. And the body is nice because it doesn't do as much of that kind of like framing, like structural framing that I find that the brain does, of compartmentalizing and trying to structure our realities. It's more fluid. It's more like, information that flows. It's the colors, it's the sensations. They're softer. They're still points of data, but they are not X's and O's. They're not, just the tech data. It's like living analog data, sound and taste and smell. And so when we really tap into that, we become more alive naturally, right? Sensation, it's like, I liken this sometimes to dry basil versus fake basil, right? They're both basil, but I tend to think sometimes an analytical, healing and doing stuff only through the brain is like this dry basil. You know that it's basil and it's giving you what you need, but nothing is like the sense, the touch, the taste, because it's giving you more options of information, and then you can put it into flow. Those are softer things naturally, right? Less structured.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, bodies are designed to flow, and we're body beings. I mean, we're thoroughly embodied. And there's something about coming home to that. Our culture was so conditioned by that Cartesian mind-body split and kind of Western disembodiment in Kant and other kind of theorists. And then, of course, there was a kind of minority tradition that did kind of look much more at embodiment, Merleau-Ponty, philosophers who were much more open to the kind of phenomena of life. But I think one of the messages for our times, and I think you said it just a minute ago about so many people are not in their bodies. I think one of the things we're being called into is to really understand the intelligence, it's plural, of the body as a porous, membranous system open to the intelligences of other forms of materiality. Because if you think about it, the planet itself is under enormous stress. Ecosystem bodies, animal bodies, plant bodies, human bodies, all under enormous stress. There's an incredible need for us to understand and internalize our continuity with a live, material, vulnerable world as ourselves, forms of vulnerability with significant powers of agency and influence. So there's something there, and it's a bit of a dance again, isn't it?
I think this is kind of in the language of physics, because that's kind of the word, the language that I work in because of movement, is that, yeah, you said something at the very beginning, which kind of echoes and brings this around, which is you can't avoid the stresses right? The planet, the people, the communities, the, altercations, but like stress, load, we talk about it in tissue as load, is unavoidable. And what we want to become is masterful at how we manipulate those forces, metabolize those through our entire being, that we have these mad skills of remaining soft and open rather than calloused and fibrotic. Those things are closer to death than animated for life, right? Those states are more dead. They're more dry basal than they are living basal. And so in this, like, that is the deepest rub, right? The deepest tension that we feel is in our finiteness to the infinite, from the, eternal to the, temporal. And so how do we remain whole inside of these constant loads? And I think that is what is urgent now, is that we're finding that in our current state, everything is more polarized, everything is more extreme, and there is no middle, and there is no give, and there is no softness, and there is no opening, right? Like what you just said was so powerful to say, people, like, what is the biggest thing we need in this time is an ability to remain completely open with significant agency, because we think of those things as two separate things, right? I'm either like locking down and holding my stance, and if you don't stand for something, you fall for anything, and where's your line, and and it's like, actually what fascia teaches you is to yield. It teaches you to yield, and there's power in the yield.
There is, and that ties up with the deepest call, I think, in contemporary spirituality, which is to surrender. The practice of surrender is key, as is coming into the body and realizing that awakening is an embodied process, that it's a bottom-up awakening process in the body. It's not about leaving the body and flying off into the realms of the eternal.
Totally. Yes. Amen. Yes.
It's about being here and being here now, as a surrendered, open, compassionate, loving, soft, fluid agent.
I think you just wrapped up the entire importance of humans need to come back from secular spirituality into like this sacred spirituality. And it is not out there, right? Like everything in life is pulling us out and away and distracted, and you can't listen to the tensions that are in you. You can't learn to read them and channel them and balance them, right? Biotensegrity is a principle in fascia, which is like, the idea is not to get rid of tension. It's to be able to have the right amounts. And the mastery is in the choice of this, but you have to be embodied. You have to read your tensions, know what they mean. And what's so interesting about human nature, and I'm sure it's evolutionarily, programmed into us, as soon as there's tension, we jump out. The only difference is that in this time and age, we're making it a practice, a discipline, a habit of jumping out of our bodies, jumping on a phone, jumping into the newspaper, jumping into the drama that's happening, right? It's like futile, right? You have to be inside, and you have to just get better. I was telling my friend the other day, I don't want my kids to have an easy life. My job is to teach them how to be strong survivors, to be skilled humans, to be masters of their own humanity, so that whatever comes, they have the spiritual guide, the compass, they have the soulful reflection, they have the skills to deal with life on life's terms. And I think that that's a very different level of spirituality than what I've experienced in, LA, in where I grew up in, Christian traditions and really went heavily into, Buddhism. And I just went into lots of different, I was a philosophy major. And I think that secular spirituality is still kind of this like, oh, you just go out here. You're like, oh, if I can, I'm the maker of my own destiny, right? There's no sensitivity to like, the world is doing what it's doing. You're not commanding it, quantum physics. To a certain degree, we have agency, right? We have choice, but usually it's in the yield. It's how we choose to respond to it rather than I'm commanding the outcome, right?
Absolutely. And I think for me, I'm commanding the outcome is the opposite of spiritual, because for me, spirituality is about letting go of the shit,
Mhm.
doing deep work, expanding, softening, yielding, being compassionate, loving, living from a place of quiet, equanimous joy that isn't outrageous, that is a radical kind of contentment, and the capacity to be with the self, which means we can be with the other. Because if I can be with my own deep pain, I can be with your deep pain. If I can't be with my own pain, I can't be with your pain. And therefore, we're more like the thing you were saying earlier, when we separate rather than connect. And the mitochondria do the same thing, by the way. So there's something here, and I guess we're going to have to end this soon because we're running out of time. But what I kind of feel that you're saying to people overall is, come into your body, really attune to it softly and gently, and allow micro movement and self-awareness to bring you into a place where you really come home to you at a whole series of levels.
Exactly right. And fascia, if you have not heard of it, is worth a dive because it's what's doing that for you in your physiology. It's what gives you the sensations. It has 7 times the amount of receptors as any other tissue. It's listening, it's feeling, it's communicating. It's your body organ of consciousness. And that is what it means to be embodied, right?
Brilliant. Anna, I want to thank you for such a fantastic conversation.
I love your language. I'm going to go back and listen to this a lot, and just, it gives me more ways to communicate. I think what you're doing is so beautiful because it's a power of communication, right? If people can get the ideas, then they can get the actionable, right? The doing. And so I just love when I meet someone who has really strong, clear, articulate language for the things that evade humans.